Well, the toasting process, really what it does, trees have a natural process to protect themselves from fire. So you heat that tree up, it's all the sugars go to the surface to protect that tree from burning. And so when we're toasting, that's what we're doing. We're toasting it to a different level, and you're pulling out the different flavors and the sugars. You toast to like a medium. You're going to pull out more vanillins. You go a little medium plus, you go into the heavy, you're going to start getting more mochas and coffees and tobacco flavors out of that wood. So, we tend to toast to what our customers' flavor profiles or what they're looking to pull out of that barrel.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode.
What's happening, friends and neighbors? Welcome back for another episode of the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I am Chris LeBeau. Today, my guests are Jeremy Wochnick and Erin and Nysse of The Barrel Mill, a cooperage in rural Minnesota, northwest of Minneapolis. I met them back in February at the American Craft Spirits Association conference that I attended in Denver, and very quickly, we fell into a great rhythm. I was learning a lot. You could feel their enthusiasm for the subject. And so, spur of the moment, I said, hey, would you guys be willing to record a conversation while we were here? And they said yes. So I appreciate them sitting down for this rather kind of impromptu conversation and rolling with my questions that were a bit more shooting from the hip than usual. Along those lines, the three of us were crowded around the mics, Jeremy and I kind of being closer, and there were some great points when Erin jumped in, and initially I wasn't prodding her to get in as close as she needed to be, so you'll have to strain a little bit up front, but we get that fixed as we kind of move through the conversation. One of the things that is interesting to talk about and has come up before on the podcast when I interviewed Margie Lehrman, the CEO of the American Craft Spirits Association, but you also heard in Denver too, is we're really in the middle of a barrel shortage right now due to all sorts of demand for lumber, climate issues, and all sorts of things. Right now, demand is high, supply is low, and so the price of barrels and just the general availability of them has really gone down, which is putting a strain on things, particularly on spirits like bourbon that require a first-use barrel. So this is in part pushing the price up or just even making barrels, honestly, darn near impossible to find, especially if you want a new one. So while this is putting a strain on barrel-aged spirits, there is a reality as well that this necessity for barrels and the problem of it is really kind of creating people to kind of think outside the box and get more creative with them. And so this has come up a lot that a number of distillers are actually getting more creative with how they create these things that don't necessarily have to be in a first run barrel. And so keeping an eye out for spirits that aren't necessarily designated bourbon could be valuable in terms of finding unique flavors. In fact, and while this is a cocktail thing, I was with a liquor distributor earlier this week who said that he had tasted an old-fashioned that a bar was barrel aging, and the thing that was important to know about this was the barrel had originally previously been used by a honey manufacturer, and so that imparted some really rich characteristics. So there's a lot of fun things happening despite the actual pressing problems we're facing too. I also love that Jeremy was able to talk a bit about the process of getting wood prepared for being molded into a barrel, thinking about the drying process, and what it is about toasting and charring that causes the wood to impart flavor in the first place. For the whiskey geeks out there, they might be all the way in there, but it's interesting to think about when heat is applied to wood, why does it char or begin to brown, and why does that actually influence the flavor? So I think for many of us that enjoy these barrel-aged spirits, thinking a little bit more in depth in terms of where this flavor comes from and why can be really valuable. So again, thank you to Erin and Jeremy. There'll be links in the show notes for all sorts of great things. You can find The Barrel Mill online at thebarrelmill.com or on Instagram at _barrel_mill. So thanks for listening, everybody, and enjoy this conversation. So first, Jeremy, thanks for taking time to talk because, of course, this is like, kind of like, spur of the moment after we met yesterday here at the ACSA.
Definitely.
Tell us a bit about Barrel Mill and how did you come to be involved here? Tell us what you do with the company.
Well, currently I'm in display sales. I started out with the company. I did maintenance for about 7 years, setting up equipment, training people on how to run the equipment. So more on the production side. We don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of how I started. But yeah, it's a great company. Been there 11 years, almost 12 years.
Yeah.
Family owned, operated. Just a big family. So love it.
Cool. In the era of spirits, I feel like, barrel aged is always a conversation. And yet, I think the cooperage process can be like misunderstood in a way. So tell us a little bit about here was something I didn't know starting yesterday. How about a good place to start? So we identify like Missouri white oak or whatever kind of white oak we're using. And we cut it down, and the first thing we don't do is turn it into a barrel. So we allow it to rest. So tell us a little bit about that process. How about that?
Well, first, you source the logs. You got to debark them. They sit. Really, you debark them. We cut them into staves, and then they air dry, or air season. So really, it's the weather and things that kind of pull out some of the tannins and the harshness in the wood that really mellow that flavor down, and then from there they get kiln dried and off to the cooperage.
So, and if any of this gets too technical, just you can punt on it. But so explain that. So in terms of it air drying and seasoning, so what would happen if I took a barrel, a tree that I just cut down, and I attempted to turn it into a barrel right away? Would it not yield good results? Would it just not work? Like, what would be the flaws of moving too quickly in that process?
I don't know 100% on that. I know that you definitely have to get the moisture content down. So when you cut that tree down, it's going to be green, it's going to be wet.
Yep.
You really have to pull some of that moisture out. And really, I think it comes down to the processing portion of that. It's harder to process wood when it's wet. All the tooling, things like that, it's really hard on that. So you really got to get that. But with barrels, you can't. It's not lumber. It's not like your house, your trim, things like that. That's going to be a lower, 0 to 4% moisture content, where we need to be up, in the teens for bending the barrel. It can't be too dry.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And I guess in a way to think about the moisture too much, like, knowing what I know about aging, which is enough to be dangerous, obviously you have the alcohol in the barrel, the wine, the booze, whatever,
yep.
Kind of passing in and out of there. And if there was also probably, and again, in addition to flavors, if it was too rich in moisture, you probably couldn't get as much liquid to pass out, or you'd be seeping too much liquid from the wood itself at that point in time.
Yeah, possibly. That could possibly change that flavor profile.
Okay. I could just be making stuff up. So.
Yeah, and that, like I said, I don't know the technicalities on that side of it. I have a woodworking background, so, I came from a cabinet and framing industry, so my knowledge kind of lies on that side of it. But as far as the juice flowing in and out of that barrel, that really comes down to weather, temperature, things like that. That's really driving that in and out of the wood, pulling those flavors. I could imagine having some of that moisture still in there might affect it a little bit, but when you toast that barrel, those sugars come to the surface, and then you char that barrel, it opens up surface area for that juice to go in and out and grab that. So I don't think if you just cut a green tree down and processed it. It's really about probably the tooling and things like that you're really affecting if you didn't air dry.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for indulging my attempts to reason that out.
Yep.
Oops. So in terms of, we have our staves cut now, and we're ready to assemble the barrel. Can you tell us a little bit about what that assembly process looks like? I think we can all envision one of these wood barrels in our head, but how does that really begin to come together at that point in time?
Well, you got your pile of lumber, really cut to a specific thickness. We 5/4, where we're running it through the machines. From there, it's really molding it so it matches the outer profile of that barrel, and then from there it goes through a joiner, which puts the edges on that piece of wood going up and down in the barrel to create that belly, the bilge in that barrel.
Yep.
So you got to get your head angle, you got to get your bilge correct, because that'll all change that volume. And barrels they're not glued together, so it's really the moisture content, the juice in there, the swelling of that wood that holds everything sealed from leaking.
It's and to think of how old the process is of assembling barrels like that. The fact that they've been able to have that tight of a seal for that long is pretty remarkable.
That's the magical part about a barrel, to be honest. You're taking a bunch of wood that's not glued and you're holding liquid. It's still amazing to me.
Sure.
I've been there 11, 12 years. So.
One of the things I remember when I first had a conversation with someone that had toured a cooperage was saying that they, at times when they, through various analyses or whatever, they could kind of understand through staves what flavor it might have to yield. And so I think part of the analysis in terms of, and we'll get into charring and toasting in a minute, but when you guys are actually assembling a barrel, is there a way that you are actually able to look at a stave or whatever you would call it, and the planks, and to understand like what flavors this might begin to actually yield into the barrel?
Really, that comes down to, it's just like any recipe. You're adding an ingredient in there, every cook is going to come out with a little different flavor from the same ingredients, right? If you're cooking you get the same ingredients that I do, it's not necessarily going to turn out exactly the same.
Right.
It's the time, it's the tasting, it's the people that are tasting the juice in that barrel as it's aging and pulling it out when they think it's ready and when they like the flavor profile.
Got it.
Yeah.
So part of it is kind of when we get into it, so the barrel is assembled, and then from there we kind of decide whether we're going to char it or toast it. And part of it, again, like we talked about in terms of aging duration, which we can discuss, is tasting it occasionally, because to understand what taste profile you're going for at that point.
Yeah.
Now, So tell us a little about toasting versus charring to begin with in terms of that, and then I have a couple other questions on that.
Well, the toasting process, really what it does, trees have a natural process to protect themselves from fire. So you heat that tree up, all the sugars go to the surface to protect that tree from burning. And so when we're toasting, that's what we're doing. We're toasting it to a different level, and you're pulling out the different flavors and the sugars. You toast to a medium, you're going to pull out more vanillins. You go a little medium plus, you go into the heavy, you're going to start getting more mochas and coffees and tobacco flavors out of that wood. So we tend to toast to what our customers' flavor profiles or what they're looking to pull out of that barrel. So you can take that same wood and get a different flavor profile depending on the toast. It's just like baking. You bake something a little too long, you're going to get a different flavor than if you pulled it out 10 minutes earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. And for the charring process, I think I've heard this before, versus toasting, what does the duration of time look like, depending on what impact? What does that scale of time look like depending on the amount of heat we're applying?
It's a pretty intense heat. So once you fully engulf that inside of that barrel on fire, you're talking seconds for char levels. Seconds to a minute to get. I don't know exact times for the different, the the char levels, but really, we start out, char one's probably around 15 seconds. You get into a medium char, you're probably around 30 to 45 seconds. Get into a heavy char, maybe just over a minute tops. But it's engulfed in flames. It's, imagine being in a house fire and you can't get out. Like, you can feel it.
Sure.
So we char on one side of the shop. You can feel it on the other side of the shop when you're charring a barrel. It's pretty intense.
God, wow. And with toasting, knowing that is more gradual, is that minutes or hours? What does toasting look like?
That's more minutes. That can take several minutes to 20 minutes, depending on toast levels.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I feel like
size of the barrel.
Sure, of course. And I feel like I've at least seen the visual on this. So, like, whereas with a charring, we're probably using more of like a blowtorch or something, versus for toasting, we're more like you would at home in a way. We're kind of inserting a large coil inside of the barrel. Is that correct?
Yeah. So toasting versus charring, really toasting we have crescents that we put wood into. We don't want the flames to actually touch the barrel. You're just putting a heat source inside of that barrel to heat it up, warm it up. Basically, it's kind of like almost steaming that wood on the inside, pulling those sugars so the sugars start flowing to that surface. And that's, we fire bend all of our barrels versus some companies are steaming them or bathing them to bend them. We're doing that process at the same time. We're toasting and bending, basically.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then, charring, you're actually lighting the wood, the barrel, inside of the barrel on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those pictures are really something to behold in that way. Something that I've never quite fully understood that I remember came up in our conversation yesterday. There, especially as like we can talk about as distillers might be trying to accelerate time frames or just experimenting, size of the barrel apparently makes a difference. Can you tell me why? Because I'm interested. I'm picturing a barrel that could be full.
Yep.
I'm interested in how the size can impact it. So tell us a little about the size of the barrel.
So size of the barrel, really, what that is surface area to volume ratio. You get into your 53s and our 30s, your surface area to volume ratio is a lot lower. You get into our 15s is really where, you get into that 15 is really where it hikes up.
Okay.
And then, you're stepping down in the sizes, it really increases. Our 5 gallons, we generally say 1 month per size gallon size of the barrel for aging time.
Okay.
So you're in a 53, you're talking 53 months.
Wow.
Average.
Sure.
This is an average. It's really, like I said, each cook has a different flavor profile that they're looking for. So they're going to, keep it in there shorter periods of time, longer periods of time.
Got it.
Depending on what you're the flavors that you want.
And many whiskeys or aged spirits in general, some have age statements, and some it's more, if it's not existing, then we know it was up to, like what is it on bourbon is like if it's under 4 years, you don't have to label it. Is that correct? Am I right?
I'm not the labeling expert. Erin might have a little more knowledge on that side.
And if you don't know, it's not a big deal. But anyways, I think one of the things that I think was conveyed when we were talking about this is if people are trying to go faster, then if they shrink that barrel size, they're going to be putting more flavor in faster as the surface. Okay.
Yep. So like a 5 gallon barrel, you really have to start tasting it early. We say 1 month per size gallon, but you're really going to want to start tasting around that 3 to 4 months because the surface area to volume ratio is so high in there. You could start pulling that flavor out really quick and over oak it.
Overdo it.
Yeah.
And in addition to over oaking it, I guess we think about slow cooking something versus kind of more with high heat. In a way, even if you are, I doubt small barrels would exist if they were just bad. But is it also a case that the flavor can almost be intense in a way because that surface area ratio is higher? I guess I'm wondering if almost like the flavors can almost still always are they going to bite harder? Do you know or
possibly?
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
In that sense, it really comes down to like the rickhouse managers and the people, the distillers and what flavors they're looking for. They might blend some of these barrels together.
Yeah.
They might blend a 5 or a 10-gallon barrel with a 30-gallon barrel that's been aging longer, because they want to mix those. You pull out some of the intense flavor out of that 5 and the 10, and mix it with something a little more mellow, to create a consistent flavor profile. Because every barrel is going to be a little different.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was talking with the Kevin Piggott, who kind of is the public face for Tullamore Dew, he was saying really at that scale, the master blender is really kind of like the most important thing, because you expect a bottle of Tullamore to always taste the same.
Correct.
But yeah, the barrels aren't always performing the same. And so how do you have that flavor profile ingrained in your brain and whatever analytics to ensure that like every bottle of Tully tastes
is the same?
Yeah.
Yeah. That comes down to that guy's job is amazing. He is the magic in that sense, creating that flavor profile. Because I quite don't understand that either. Like, okay, if this barrel is a little green and this barrel's got, how much of this barrel do you put in with that barrel to mix? But that probably comes from just time. A lot of people in this industry, they start out green, they're greenhorns, and they work their way up, and it depends on who they're working under and the knowledge they're getting passed down to them too. Location is probably a big deal too. So you're talking, some of our customers are in Texas, they're going to have, more heat, more, you know what I mean, the different flavor profiles coming out of those barrels versus somebody who's in Canada and half the year that barrel is frozen, Yeah,
and I guess depending on how much like a rickhouse is like temperature controlled could be a thing. But yeah, it's like the whole idea that an age statement should not be viewed as
a quality statement.
Yeah. Oh, and also as an equivalent, right?
Yeah,
4 years coming from something out of Alberta versus 4 years to something that's in an that's in a an un-air conditioned rickhouse or whatever.
Right.
Or anyways, I'm stumbling over that word here. But yeah, but the age statement isn't also going to be one better, but also is not going to be the same. 4 does not equal 4.
Right.
Huh. Okay.
So I had a conversation with a gal yesterday at the trade show, and it was pretty interesting. She's new, but she's working with small like 3-liter barrels, and she took this 3-liter barrel, filled it, and she drove up and down the East Coast to hit different weathers in like a 4-week time frame. And she said it was amazing how much faster it aged just by doing that, driving up and down the coast. Just getting different barometric pressures to your moisture to the different weathers across the eastern seaboard. So I mean, there's so many different factors there. Location of the rickhouse even.
Yeah, no, I've heard that.
Moving the barrels
I've heard
around.
That too.
Interesting studies with that.
Yeah, because you the higher you are in your rickhouse, the hotter it's going to be.
Right.
So some companies are rotating these barrels so they're more even. Some are pulling and blending, because they know that the higher barrels are going to age a lot faster. Yeah,
and like maybe that's something I need to find like a link to also for the show is like, as we put the episode out, is like the idea of, are there the temperature differentials to when like the yield rates or the extraction rates really begin to like almost like exponentially curve?
Different companies have different metrics on how they measure that.
Okay, yeah, because that is interesting to me that. Going back to a conversation I had recently where this distiller was talking about, like, I think this was part of our conversation yesterday. If I'm going to make a reposado tequila, especially in Mexico, like that he felt like was a matter of weeks or just even a few months. But a huge portion of that is the temperature range that you're going to be experiencing in a lot of Mexico versus if he was suddenly aging in northern France.
Right.
Like that. So yeah. So anyway, so that'll be fun to get down because it's so interesting to me that like, how do you do this for 12 years and it tastes great, but like, oh, we did this for 2 months and it was too long, right? That's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely fascinating. What was the question?
I think I was just rambling.
Yeah.
So we were talking about barrel size in that way. So I think one of the things that is interesting when you move into the broader whiskey or aged spirit conversation, bourbon obviously is like single first use barrel runs.
Yep.
And yesterday, even I was tasting two American malt whiskeys from
Single malts.
From Talnua, and they were saying, or one of them is first run, and one of them is ex bourbon.
Yep.
And so in a world where we want to hopefully be responsible stewards of trees and whatnot, talk to us about how we think about what we're getting off of a first run use of a barrel versus something that's a second or third use, and how should distillers be thinking about, hopefully, I mean, again, people come into the store looking for the word bourbon, and yet how do they use this in a way that is interesting? What flavors are we potentially going to be pulling off of one versus another?
The first runs you're going to get, for as bourbons too, especially, I think they're looking for a lot more of those vanillins and things like that in their flavor profiles. As far as moving outside of the bourbons, we've already kind of noticed it. More people are starting first and second runs. I think they're starting to hang on to their barrels longer and creating more labels, just with the prices of everything too, and the sustainability, finding the wood. But we've recognized a transfer of barrels in the last few years that is way more prevalent today than it was in the past. People are buying bourbon barrels to put their rums in, and then that rum barrel is going to a maple syrup company, and that maple syrup company is selling it back to a beer guy the transfer of that barrel is starting, and in all of these guys, the bigger this industry gets, the more people are going to get creative and try to find their own niche into the market and looking for different flavors, so they're getting more creative in what they're doing. Some of them, they're putting in their own sherry in there to impart that flavor onto whatever the next spirit, so they're getting really creative in what they're going to make.
Yeah.
And Erin wants to add something.
Erin, you're going to need to, they're not going to be able to hear you if you...
I just wanted to add, I talk to a lot of customers and they ask a lot of these questions, especially if they're using, like a fresh dump bourbon barrel or, any fresh dump barrel that they want to use to impart. There's a couple things. Nosing the barrel is really important. So when you were talking about finishing, and how do they know when to pull it and what flavors are they importing? And you said, that guy's got a great job. He does. And nosing it is a big deal. And people that are really good can nose a barrel and go, we're going to pull that one. That one's not ready yet. That kind of thing. But it's really important for people to know, if you are looking to buy a fresh dump barrel, I always recommend that people ask whomever they're buying that barrel from if they can have a sample of what was in that barrel, because that's going to help you decide the flavor profile you want. Maybe you're getting notes from there that you don't necessarily want in your spirit. Maybe you can get creative with it, and those two might not necessarily be the same. Yeah. So if you get two of those ex-bourbon barrels and you put them in, you're like, wow, this one really pulled a lot of notes that I want, but this one didn't. So it's important if people are gonna invest and they really want to make that spirit or finish with it, that they ask for a sample before they buy the barrels.
Got it. Yeah, I remember yesterday, I think I was in the tasting hour afterwards, 291 had something. They were like, oh, this is our whiskey, and then it went to Wisconsin for maple syrup, then it came back to us for more whiskey, then it went back to them. So here's a question, and I would imagine, so we're obviously currently in the middle of like a relative barrel shortage, or they're not super easy to come by. The minute you move into the market for reused barrels, or for a second or third run barrel, is it easier for distillers to come across used barrels, or is it hard across the board right now to find them at all? Because in my mind, bourbon just feels like it is so in this like italicized mark of like the demand, that I wonder what the demand is in comparison for second and third runs.
I can tell you this. I know a lot of our distilleries are looking for sources to sell their barrels. Everybody trying to recoup some of that price that they got stuck into that barrel. I think some people are afraid to get rid of some of their barrels sometimes,
sure.
Not knowing what their next step is, things like that. It's been really interesting because I struggle even finding, and I work more on the display side in sales, and I am struggling finding used barrels, fresh dumps right now.
Got it.
Because there's so many people out there buying them up right now that you got to know what areas to look. Because you got furniture people, you got maple syrups, you got Tabascos, you've got honeys, you've got so many people buying these up, and it's just trying to find, those little niches that groups of people that are
Damn it,
buying
honey,
these.
stop stealing all of our barrels. Now, to that end, the industry has also tried to accommodate that shortage by moving into things. So you guys have spirals, isn't it?
Correct.
Tell us what those are and why someone should think about, why a distiller might use those, especially in an era of a barrel shortage.
Big thing right now is finishing. On the distilling side is really finishing with a different flavor profile. We offer different species with different flavors. Getting a little niche in the market and trying to find a different flavor that somebody hasn't tasted before. Also, I personally feel it's coming to a point that alternatives are being looked down upon. I think in the old ways of this industry, people are specifically, I need to be in a 53-gallon barrel. I need, they're very stuck in their ways. But as new generations are taking over the distilling and the brewing and all of that, you got more people looking outside of the box and thinking outside of the box and trying new things. And really, when you're getting into the market, you don't have a lot of capital, so you're looking for ways to be able to get something out to market with similar flavors as a 53-gallon barrel or even a smaller barrel. So definitely alternatives are kind of the way to go. The infusion spiral is amazing because it's definitely cleaner than chips. It integrates smoother than chips, quicker than staves. Staves are going to take a lot longer.
Okay.
And with the infusion spiral, there's so much surface area there that with the spiral cut in there, it opens up the end grands, so you're extracting a lot quicker. We've got companies that are doing it in 24 hours with recirc tanks, and different technologies are coming into play now too that are it's changing the market. We're kind of at the beginning stages of it, so it's going to be fun to see where we go in the next 10 years with everything.
Because one of the things that, I know that the big weeded bourbon company, Maker's Mark, does. They kind of have the pick your own barrel or add your own finishes, I think, to some of their. So what you're saying is, so yesterday when I was even touring around, I saw people offering, kind of wood chips that you could add. So one, obviously, kind of a spiral is potentially going to be cleaner and easier to harvest out of there. But with a traditional stave, is because of the way that the spiral is cut, that it essentially has more surface area again for that for the liquid to interact with than a stave? Okay.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep. What's also nice about the spiral is it's more repeatable. It's more consistent than a chip would be. Because you when you're toasting, even the spirals, with chips, it's not going to evenly toast. It depends on where it's sitting in the oven. Think about cooking a pizza. Sometimes you got to rotate that pizza in the oven a little bit because one side's baking a little faster than the other.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of going to be the same with chips. With a spiral, it is more repeatable. So companies can kind of trust if they're going to buy the spiral and they're going to age it this long, that next batch is going to be very similar to that. Where chips isn't always going to be that way. You're measuring pounds. Some of the flakes might be a little bigger than the others. They're going to toast a little differently as well.
Yeah. Hitting on the shortage end of things and the sustainability front and thinking about the spirals, how is the industry kind of at large thinking about, obviously in order to make a new barrel, we need to cut down a tree. How are there ways that we're trying to be? And I feel like when I talked with the ACSA, they talked about some stewardship pieces in place to try to look after this. What's being done to kind of make sure that we have trees for the future, but also, of course, that we are able to still have delicious aged spirits? I
feel, especially this day and age, everyone's very conscientious about the future. You got a lot of newer people, younger kids coming into the industry, which is pounded into them, recycle, do this, being stewards of the earth. So you're starting to get, the old mixed with the new generations, and it definitely isn't, more in play. Cooperages are starting to sign up for these sustainability programs and things like that. There's a lot of things, that are up and coming, and managing forests, that's going to have to take place more than what we have been doing to move forward in the future. You think of France, and they've had oak for thousands of years. They started with shipbuilding. They've been very good stewards and very good at managing those forests. And I don't see barrels ever going away. And I think if we start focusing more on that, the wood's always going to be there. You just got to plan more. Harvest less, clear cut less, things like that. There's a lot of private land. That's the problem when you come into a lot of our wood is on private land. You can't necessarily control somebody who owns that property. If they want a clear cut, they're going to let someone come in and clear cut, So it's really getting the EPA involved and, different organizations, money, like the ACSA, being a part of these different groups and programs and donating. These groups are starting to stick more money into those areas because they don't want to lose this industry either.
Yeah. Sure. Come on in.
I just wanted to touch on when you were talking about sustainability. And that's really something, we utilize all of our wood. We cut our heads. So you have a square, you cut a circle inside the square. Those edges and those ends, we use when we're toasting. So we really utilize almost every piece of wood, all the way through.
There really is no waste involved.
We really have no waste. We use everything from that wood. And also, I think something that people aren't talking about that they should is the logging industry. Kids aren't going to college to be loggers. And so that, I think, aids a little bit in the shorting, because obviously barrels are not the only people that need wood. We use wood for a lot of things. And logging industry is hard. New people are not coming into that. So you only have so many loggers. And I think that's something people should talk about more. But then there's a lot of initiatives that are out there too for replanting and things like that. But I love that we as a company utilize literally everything and almost have no waste. So that's really good. And some of our partners, and some that are here today, absolutely love that. And they've won their own sustainability awards. So, right. It's a big deal. It's a big deal, especially with costs the way they are right now.
I think more companies they're starting to look at, from start to finish, how to reuse, recycle, get the cost down. People are more aware of all the ins and outs of their company and focusing on being better stewards to the earth too. It's not just one part of the industry versus, I think everyone's coming together, and really that's what it's going to take, is the industry is coming together and focusing on it.
I do think yesterday I was talking with a gentleman who sells distilling equipment, and he was talking about that, finding the engineers and technicians to run that equipment. He goes, overall, this pays. He goes, you want to make $85,000 a year with benefits? He goes, come see me. And I think one of the things that I hope is interesting, I think about even coming up, I'm 41, that it feels like for a long time, and I feel like the conversation is shifting, that it was like, if you don't go to college and have some kind of office job or whatever, you're kind of a loser, So, But I think that it's interesting, number of people I know that are my age and also even younger, where not saying college is ever a bad choice, it just shouldn't be the only choice, or other ones shouldn't be looked down upon. And some people anymore in realizing, especially as we become more withdrawn from our food, I'd like to be closer to the earth, and to look at a barrel and be like, oh, isn't this so beautiful? But what were all the steps required, right? You love whiskey, you should probably be thinking about farmers that are growing grains in the first place. Yep. And so, for us to worship the juice, but not have this idea, and not
look down on the farmer and not look down on the logger, because they all take part in that
Yes.
that process and that end product all the way through. And no one person's better than another, and just because you went to college doesn't mean you're any better than somebody who went into the logging industry.
Yeah.
Probably because their parents did it and they started cutting trees down when they were 12. And some of those guys come out of high school making more money than
Right.
anyone who went to a 4-year degree, and they don't have any student debt.
Yeah, exactly. So it is fascinating. And listen, everybody needs to do what's right for them. This doesn't have to become an employment podcast right now, although maybe this should be brought to you by the Department of Labor. I don't know. But anyways, but I think
it comes down to following your heart.
Yes.
Listening to what you want to do and not necessarily everyone else. And social media kind of hurts that a little bit, I think, with the newer generations, because everyone sees what everyone else is doing and where they're at, and kind of judging their lives on where everyone else is at. And you just got to remember that, happiness, it doesn't mean bringing home $100,000, $200,000 a year. Sometimes happiness is going home to a family and being able to cook dinner for them, and being happy at work and enjoying what you do.
About trade schools and people apprenticing, and I think we've lost a lot of that. We're all kind of in your age group. We're all in our 40s, and we kind of grew up in an era where we had like a blue collar, a blue and a white collar, in our neighborhoods, and we don't have that as much anymore. But you can't have a thriving society if you have all doctors.
Yeah, right.
So what you mentioned, and I want to piggyback on that because I've been a teacher in some realms, and our children right now don't know. They think green beans come from a can. Spirit comes from, the bottle at the store. But back into the spirit industry, people do this, especially craft, because they love it. Yep. Not a lot of people are getting rich, being distillers, but there's a love for that. And I love to see everyone networking, talking about what they're doing. People talk about the barrels, the water source. We were just in Texas, and they have an interesting take, on the barrels, breathing their oak, things of that nature. And everybody's got a little bit of a different take, like Jeremy was saying, different cooks. But I think it's important that we're doing our stewardship, not just for the earth, but teaching newer generations what is going into product, what is a process, where do things come from, just on a very elementary type scale. And I think we need to bring that back for our kids. Yeah.
Yep. Temu might be cheaper to buy something, but is it helping our economy? Is it helping our growth as a country? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't buy products from other countries and things like that, but you're talking about local economics and things like that. I think we need to start focusing a little more on that, and I think the Barrel Mill is a prime example of it. It's a family-owned local company, and it shows in our quality of our product and what our customers are getting into their bottles. It's finding that love, something that you enjoy doing, and any job you're not going to enjoy every minute of the day.
Right.
You got to remember that as well. But not just going out there and doing something just to bring home a paycheck. And
Are there any questions? We've covered quite a bit of ground already, but are there any questions that distillers should be asking themselves about barrels, or things they typically about barrels or barrel aging that you find that they, or any kind of parting wisdom in terms of a distiller that is or is planning to be aging stuff, like that they should probably think twice about before they just jump in and just start throwing stuff into barrels?
Oh, there's a lot to think. There's a lot to think about before you just start dumping. Now, first, money. How you're going to distribute your bottles. What is your price points? Things like that are good questions to think about. It's not an easy side of the industry to get into without having money backing. Things like that. That's very important. Location, because I feel like having a story if you're getting into distilling, having that story and that background and location and being connected to the community, because really who's supporting these small distilleries? It's their communities that are supporting them 100%. So trying not to grow too fast either. Yes, you want to sell volume, but you got to win your market first before you can go in and try to win other markets, and creating and getting that feedback from your community and things that maybe you can change, or maybe this flavor isn't great. I might love it, but the community kind of isn't buying it. Asking those kind of questions and paying attention.
Sorry, that just made me think of a couple of good ones. I've seen this with distillers on, both ends of the spectrum. One thing that I would encourage that I've seen happen for distilleries, both good and bad, is think about not just flavor or what you want to do with your barrel, but how are you going to grow? And this has been a big deal within the market too, especially, being bonded. So, you have people, they get in, they get a place, and they're like, we don't have enough space, or this isn't efficient enough for us to not only store our barrels, but grow at the rate we want to, still be bonded, your utility usages, and zoning and laws of things. So really, really, really look into it. Work with good people. I would tell anybody to work with a TTB attorney. We had one here today, and he also spoke at a craft distilling course I took at SIBO. These are important things to know, because distillers are great at what they're doing, but not necessarily maybe on the distribution side or on the bonded side. And those costs can really kill someone if they don't do it right, or hinder their production a lot. So those are good things to think about. But also I wanted to piggyback on what you all were saying too, and especially for ACSA, because this is craft. There's a lot of things that are coming into the market. People are like, RTDs, big thing right now. And what is going to set you apart? How do you work with your distributor? How are you getting your product to market? And then all of the laws. So there was a lot of interesting conversations here yesterday that I was in and amongst different groups, that the laws are so tough. And so I love that this organization is really working to work together to help lobby and stand up for themselves, because these are all, they're not as big and mass produced as everyone else. And that's another thing to consider in this market.
Finding
too.
that community you can talk to get your answers.
Yeah, absolutely. And having, somebody else having your back.
Yep.
And this community is so great because they help each other.
Yep.
It's really neat.
What are you going to sell until you get that 53-gallon barrel aged long enough to bottle it?
Right.
Are you going to start in a smaller barrel so you can get something on the shelf quicker? Are you going to start with the clear liquids, gins and your vodkas? There's a lot to think about, because you got to bring money in to be able to put more money away to make more money in the future.
Right. So we have a lot of customers that we work with that use both large and small barrels. So you're rapidly aging in a smaller barrel, like Jeremy was talking about, the surface to volume ratio. So you can bring product to market quicker, as opposed to, 4 or 5
while
years,
you're sitting on that 53-gallon
Right.
aging for 4 years at the same time. Don't get it in over your head. Don't go out and buy and try to fill 100 barrels. Maybe fill a couple barrels, 53 gallons, and you know what I mean? So you're not exhausting all of your
Well, right, and you don't want everything just sitting. You
Yep.
can produce and put everything in a barrel for its stage of maturation, and then you're like, okay, well, what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah.
Some people do, clear spirit as well, but we got to sample a lot of, what's technically clear spirit that was, finished and aged with oak. So that's kind of cool too. So it's really neat to find out and to actually sample and taste what people are doing with we're the vessel.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was incredible. We had so much fun last night.
Well, and depending on what route you go, it's really coming down to labeling and your age statements and things like that. Think about that. What do you want on that bottle? Because, if it's aged for 6 months, it really comes down to, the TTB and what they're going to allow for your recipe on that label.
Your colas. Yeah, you have to submit all of that.
Yep.
And so many distillers run into, I feel like, a hard time with that. I've spoken to a lot of them.
Right.
Yeah, and it's hard. And it's interesting, too, because we offer different species within our oak infusion spirals. And not so much spirit, but on the beer side, people are loving to use different things, but they're coming into different laws with different species that where maybe they run into something with the TTB, but not necessarily with the FDA, and vice versa, and trying to get that stuff labeled. So it's really great to network with other people and really have, somebody, or like I said, an attorney that can really help. But on top of that, for this community to lobby together, which is a lot of what we were talking about yesterday within different groups.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Not because you're not just, it's not just competition. You're actually friends. You're working with your competition to achieve an end goal.
But there's a lot of laws, and we were talking about this yesterday too, that are really old, like prohibition.
Right.
And we're like, what?
A lot of laws out there in most states are pre-prohibition laws, and it really, personally, helps out the big guys, and the more smaller guys that are going to come in, they got to group together to
have their voices heard.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
Well, honestly, I mean, I feel like this is what I love about these conversations. I feel like once they get started, it's like you could just run with them for forever. But this has been great, and I know you guys also have to get to your booth or whatever. But thanks for taking time this morning. I appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
Thanks for asking us.
You bet.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter. Or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktailing.